Section 1. The Night the Sea Turned Black. November 12, 1942. The River Clyde, Scotland. Rain needles down from a low, iron sky, rattling against scaffolding and bare steel. Floodlights cast harsh cones of white across the shipyard, turning falling rain into slanted lines of silver. The river itself is black, thick as oil, carrying the echoes of hammer strikes and shouted orders downstream toward the open Atlantic. Chief Naval Architect Thomas McIntyre stands at the edge of the slipway, coat collar pulled high, notebook pressed against his chest. He has not slept properly in days. His boots are soaked through, his hands numb, but his eyes remain fixed on the half-finished merchant hull looming above him like a stranded whale. This ship is already obsolete. McIntyre knows it. Every man in the yard knows it. And yet the Admiralty wants 20 more just like her. Only weeks earlier, the telegrams began arriving in bunches, their language stripped of ceremony and optimism. Convoy PQ-17 had been shattered in the Arctic. Of 35 merchant ships that sailed in July, only 11 reached Soviet ports. The rest were sunk, scattered across hundreds of miles of freezing sea, victims of U-boats, Luftwaffe bombers, and a catastrophic Admiralty ordered to disperse. The men who survived told the story with hollow eyes. Ships isolated and hunted one by one, ice choking the decks, guns frozen solid, crews abandoning burning hulls into water that killed within minutes. By autumn, the verdict inside the Admiralty was whispered, not spoken aloud. The Arctic convoys were finished. German submarines prowled the Norwegian Sea with near impunity. Focke-Wulf Condors and Heinkel bombers ranged freely from bases in occupied Norway. The Kriegsmarine's heavy units waited like wolves behind the fjords. Every ton of supplies sent north seemed destined for the ocean floor. And yet, inside a cold shipyard on the Clyde, McIntyre and a handful of engineers have been told to do something that borders on madness. Make the next convoy survivable. The demand comes not as a suggestion, but as an order. Redesign merchant ships already under construction. Improve their defenses. Winterize their hulls. Do it immediately. Do it without slowing production. And do it knowing that failure means more wrecks, more frozen bodies, and the slow strangling of the Soviet war effort. McIntyre flips open his notebook, pages crammed with hurried sketches and calculations. The problem is brutally simple. Merchant ships were never meant to fight. Their decks are cluttered, their silhouettes tall, their armor non-existent. In Arctic waters, even their basic machinery struggles. Condensers freeze. Lubricants thicken. Steel becomes brittle under constant cold stress. Now they are being asked to sail directly into the most lethal naval killing ground on Earth. Behind him, a welder curses as a torch sputters in the rain. The yard works around the clock now. Shifts blur together. Skilled men are pulled from other projects and reassigned without explanation. The usual rhythms of peacetime construction are gone, replaced by urgency that borders on panic. McIntyre walks along the hull, running a gloved hand over bare steel plates. He can almost see the Arctic spray freezing where it strikes, building weight with every wave. He imagines the sound of bombs falling through cloud cover, the sudden violence of a torpedo impact. The existing designs will not survive that. Inside a temporary office lit by a single bare bulb, McIntyre meets with Commander Alan Hughes from the Admiralty. Hughes has the look of a man who has aged 10 years in one summer. He does not waste words. The Russians need supplies, Hughes says. Tanks, trucks, aircraft fuel, food. Stalin is already asking questions we can't afford to answer. McIntyre spreads his sketches across the table. He points to the gun platforms first. We add more anti-aircraft mounts. Not decorative ones. Real coverage. Overlapping arcs. Hughes raises an eyebrow. On a merchant hull, they'll die without it. McIntyre replies flatly. And we raise the gun tubs, widen the decks. Improve ammunition access. Crews can't fight with frozen hands. Hughes nods slowly. What about the cold? McIntyre hesitates, then taps the hull cross-section. Insulation. Extra plating where it matters. Steam lines rerouted to keep critical systems warm. It won't be elegant. It doesn't need to be. Outside, a siren wails briefly, then cuts off. Another air raid drill. No one moves. Everyone keeps working. The impossible part is not the engineering itself. McIntyre knows the solutions in theory. The impossible part is time. Ships are already on the slips. Materials are rationed. Skilled labor is scarce. Every change risks slowing production, and every delay means fewer ships sailing north before winter tightens its grip. Yet as McIntyre looks again at the half-built hull, he realizes something with quiet clarity. If they build these ships the old way, they will not return. If they change everything now, there's a chance. And in late 1942, a chance is all Britain has left to offer the Arctic convoys. Section 2. After PQ-17, no one believed the sea could be tamed. December 1942 settles over Britain like a weight. Frost creeps along the Clyde's banks, locking scaffolding joints and stiffening steel plates before they can be riveted. The river steams faintly at dawn, warmer than the air above it, while ice crystals form on cables and railings. Inside the Admiralty, maps of the Arctic routes remain pinned to the walls, but no new convoy lines are drawn in pencil. Only erasures remain, smudged and incomplete. The shadow of PQ-17 hangs over every meeting. Rear Admiral Dudley Pound's order from July still echoes in the minds of sailors and officers alike. Convoy is to scatter. The decision, made in fear of a rumored sortie by the battleship Tirpitz, condemned isolated merchantmen to death. U-boats picked them off at leisure. Luftwaffe bombers found targets one by one. The sea swallowed men whole. Now, whenever Arctic convoys are mentioned, silence follows. In the wardrooms, veteran escorts shake their heads. In shipyards, foremen mutter that no amount of steel will stop a torpedo. The Arctic, they say, cannot be engineered away. It freezes guns, blinds lookouts, shatters hulls. It favors the hunter, not the convoy. Thomas McIntyre hears these doubts every day. He hears them in the voices of draftsmen hunched over drawing boards at 3 a.m. He hears them in the pause before a welder strikes an arc, knowing the plate he's joining may soon be torn apart by explosives. He hears them in himself, in the moments before sleep that never quite comes. But the Admiralty does not ask whether it can be done. It asks only how fast. In early December, McIntyre is summoned to London. The train ride south is cold and uncomfortable, carriages unheated to save coal. At the Admiralty building, he is ushered into a cramped room where naval officers, engineers, and civilian officials crowd around a long table. The air smells of damp wool and cigarette smoke. On the table lie photographs from PQ-17, grainy images of wreckage protruding from ice floes. Lifeboats crushed by pack ice. Men wrapped in blankets, eyes staring past the camera. Vice Admiral Sir Max Horton, commander of Western approaches, speaks without ceremony. "We cannot stop the convoys," he says. "Not politically, not strategically. The Russians must be supplied." A captain from Naval Intelligence interjects. "The Germans know the routes. They know our escorts are stretched thin. They know the ships cannot defend themselves." Horton turns to McIntyre. "Which is why you are here." McIntyre stands, unrolling new drawings across the table. His voice is steady, though his throat is dry. "Merchant ships are not warships. We can't change that, but we can change how they survive long enough to be escorted." He points to revised deck layouts. Additional Oerlikon 20mm mounts positioned to cover blind spots. Raised platforms to prevent spray icing over the guns. Ammunition lockers insulated and heated using rerouted steam lines. "These ships will not shoot down entire bomber formations," McIntyre says, "but they will make attacks costly. They will force higher bombing altitudes. They will disrupt aim." A skeptical murmur ripples around the room. "And the cold?" someone asks. McIntyre flips to a cross-section of the hull. "We add insulation around engine rooms and critical piping. We reinforce exposed steel to reduce brittle fracture. We improve drainage so ice doesn't build up on deck." A commander frowns. "That adds weight." "Yes, McIntyre replies. But a slightly slower ship that stays afloat is preferable to a fast one that sinks. There is no applause, no declaration of faith, only a grudging acceptance that there is no alternative. By Christmas, the orders go out. Shipyards across Britain receive instructions to halt, modify, and reconfigure vessels already halfway complete. This is heresy in peacetime engineering. Changes mid-construction invite mistakes, delays, and failures. In wartime, it is a gamble with lives. On the Clyde, McIntyre oversees the first implementation. Steel is cut away and re-welded. New gun tubs rise where cargo cranes once stood. Decks are widened, clutter reorganized. Electric heaters are installed in gun positions, crude but effective. The men grumble, but they work. They work because rumors filter back from Russia. Entire Soviet divisions short trucks. Airfields without fuel. Tank units immobilized for lack of spare parts. The convoys are not abstract lines on a map. They are lifelines. By late December, the first modified hull is ready to launch. Snow falls steadily as she slides into the river, her altered silhouette unmistakable. She looks heavier, more aggressive. Less like a merchantman, more like a reluctant fighter. McIntyre watches her settle into the water, heart pounding. He knows this ship will be tested not in trials, but under fire. The Arctic does not forgive miscalculations. And soon, the sea will pass judgment on everything they have changed. Section 3. Steel against ice and fire. January 1943 arrives with a bitterness that seems personal. Across the North Atlantic, storms churn the sea into a heaving gray mass, while farther north, ice fields drift like slow-moving fortresses. The first of the modified merchant ships steams cautiously out of the Clyde under a slate-colored sky, her decks already rimed with frost. Her name is SS Empire Starling. Captain Edward Collins stands on the bridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the shoreline fade into mist. He is a merchant mariner by trade, not a warrior by inclination. Before the war, his greatest concern was schedules and cargo manifests. Now he commands a ship that bristles with guns, carrying tanks and fuel bound from Murmansk. Below him, the engine room thrums steadily. Steam lines hiss softly, heat bleeding into spaces that would otherwise freeze solid. Collins can feel it through the soles of his boots. It is not warmth exactly, but it is life. As Empire Starling joins her convoy, the changes are immediately apparent. Where once merchant ships sailed as passive targets, these vessels now carry watchful crews at the rails. Gunners in heavy parkas test their mounts, working stiff mechanisms that resist the cold. Ammunition handlers check heated lockers, ensuring shells are not brittle with frost. The escorts form up around them. Destroyers and corvettes, many scarred from previous runs, take station like shepherd dogs guarding a flock. Among them is HMS Onslow, her captain keenly aware of what happened to PQ-17. No one intends to repeat that mistake. The convoy pushes north. Within days, the temperature drops further. Spray freezes where it lands, coating superstructures in thick white armor. Men chip ice constantly, hammers ringing against steel in a relentless rhythm. On older ships, this labor often fails to keep pace. Here, improved drainage channels allow ice to slide away rather than accumulate. It is a small difference, but in the Arctic, small differences are the margin between stability and capsize. On the third night out, the first alarm sounds. A lookout's voice cuts through the darkness. Aircraft bearing 080. Gunners scramble to their stations as the sky fills with the distant drone of engines. German bombers approach low over the water, silhouettes barely visible against the overcast. They are experienced crews, veterans of earlier convoy hunts, expecting frightened merchantmen with minimal defenses. What they find instead gives them pause. As flares burst overhead, lighting the sea in harsh white, the convoy answers with fire. Tracers leap upward from multiple ships, forming a tangled web of red and green. Empire Starling's forward Oerlikon barks in short, controlled bursts, the recoil sharp but manageable despite the cold. A Ju-88 dives toward the convoy, releasing bombs in a shallow run. Explosions erupt astern of one freighter, geysers of water rising like pillars. The bomber pulls up, engines straining, only to fly through a curtain of tracer fire that laces the air where expected safety. On the bridge, Collins watches one aircraft veer sharply away, its attack aborted. Another takes a hit, smoke trailing as it limps toward the Norwegian coast. The convoy survives the night. It is not a victory in the traditional sense. No enemy planes are confirmed destroyed. But something has changed. The Germans did not attack with impunity. They did not linger. The cost of each run has risen. Word spreads quickly. In occupied Norway, Luftwaffe commanders note the difference. Reports speak of heavier defensive fire, better coordination among merchant ships. Bombing accuracy suffers. Losses, though still acceptable, are no longer trivial. At sea, U-boats begin to test the convoy as well. In the gray twilight of an Arctic afternoon, a torpedo slices through the water toward a freighter near the center of the formation. Lookouts spot the wake in time. The helm goes hard over. The torpedo misses by meters, passing harmlessly down the ship's side. Depth charges roll from the sterns of escorts, detonations echoing through the water. The U-boat withdraws, shaken but alive. Again, the convoy survives. Back on the Clyde, McIntyre receives the first after-action reports. They arrive not as glowing praise, but as sober assessments. Guns remained operational longer. Crews reported less freezing of critical systems. Casualties were lower than expected. For McIntyre, the most important words are understated. Ship maintained station throughout engagement. Maintained station. PQ-17 fell apart because it scattered. Because fear and uncertainty broke cohesion. Now, these ships hold together, fighting as a group rather than dying alone. But the test is far from over. The Germans adapt quickly. Heavy units still lurk in the fjords. The battleship Scharnhorst remains a threat, and winter tightens its grip, promising darker days and harsher seas. As Empire's Starling presses onward toward Murmansk, ice thickens on her bow, and the horizon disappears into snow. Collins knows they're only halfway there. The Arctic has not been tamed. It has merely been challenged. Section 4. The enemy watches and learns. February 1943 brings darkness that seems endless. Above the Arctic Circle, daylight becomes a rumor. A brief gray smudge on the horizon before night reclaims the sky. The convoy moves through a world of shadow and sound, guided by dim navigation lights and the steady pulse of engines pushing against cold, resistant water. Aboard Empire Starling, Captain Collins sleeps in short bursts, fully clothed, boots beside his bunk. Every vibration of the hull registers as potential danger. Ice groans along the plates, sometimes cracking loud enough to send men scrambling to stations before realizing it is not an explosion. Far to the south, in German headquarters in Trondheim, Captain Nazur C. Heinrich Müller studies reconnaissance reports with mounting irritation. He has hunted Arctic convoys before. He knows their weaknesses, or thought he did. The latest aerial photographs show merchant ships with altered silhouettes, gun positions where there should be none, fire patterns that suggest coordination, not panic. Pilots report heavier flak and fewer clean bombing runs. U-boat commanders complain of convoys that refuse to scatter, ships that maneuver together and defend one another. Muller taps a pencil against the map. They have changed something, he mutters. The German response is methodical. Luftwaffe units are instructed to attack from higher altitudes, hoping to stay out of the thickest defensive fire. Bomb loads are adjusted. Timing is altered to exploit moments when crews are exhausted from constant ice clearing. At sea, U-boats begin to coordinate wolfpack tactics more aggressively, probing convoy edges, seeking the one ship that strays too far, the one moment when vigilance slips. On the convoy, the strain is constant. Men work 12-hour shifts that stretch into 16. Hands crack and bleed despite gloves. Eyelashes freeze together. The guns, though improved, still require constant attention. Grease thickens. Springs lose tension. Every piece of machinery fights the cold as fiercely as the enemy. Yet the changes hold. When a gun freezes, heaters bring it back faster than before. When ice builds on deck, drainage channels prevent dangerous topweight. When aircraft appear, more barrels point skyward, more eyes track targets. One night, a German bomber presses its luck. It dives lower than doctrine advises, attempting to slip beneath the flak. As it approaches, Empire Starling's port gun opens fire, followed instantly by two neighboring ships. Tracers converge. The aircraft shudders, wing dipping sharply before it slams into the sea in a burst of flame and spray. Cheers erupt briefly, then die away. There is no time for celebration. Another aircraft is already lining up its run. The convoy reaches Murmansk battered but intact. Cargo is unloaded under blackout conditions, cranes creaking in the cold. Soviet dockworkers move with grim efficiency, unloading tanks, trucks, crates of ammunition, and food. Red Army officers inspect the ships with interest, noting the guns, the reinforced hulls, the visible scars of battle. One Soviet officer shakes Colin's hand. "You brought us winter," he says simply. The return voyage is no easier, but it is survivable. When Empire Starling finally limps back into British waters, her hull bears the marks of ice and near misses. But she floats. Her crew steps ashore exhausted, thinner, older but alive. Back on the Clyde, McIntyre listens to Colin's account in a drafty office overlooking the yard. He hears about frozen nights, sudden attacks, guns firing until barrels glowed faintly red in the darkness. He hears, too, about what did not happen. Ships did not scatter. Guns did not fail completely. Crews did not freeze helplessly at their stations. The data matters. The human cost matters more. Word spreads through the Admiralty. The Arctic convoys are not dead. They are wounded, battered, but moving. Production orders increase. More ships are modified. Some designs are refined further. Lessons learned are fed back into the yards with ruthless speed. Every improvement is paid for in time and effort, but the alternative is unthinkable. The Germans, for their part, escalate. More aircraft are assigned. Heavy surface units are repositioned. The battleship Scharnhorst and the cruiser Prinz Eugen loom as threats that could shatter a convoy in minutes. The Arctic lanes remain lethal. But now, when convoys sail north, they do so with something they lacked after PQ-17. A fighting chance. Section 5. When steel met the wolfpack. March 1943 does not arrive quietly. It comes with gale force winds that tear at convoy formations and seas that rise like moving walls of slate and white. The Arctic Ocean no longer merely threatens the ships. It assaults them. Convoy JW-53 fights its way north through some of the worst weather recorded that winter. Waves smash over bows, tearing away railings and smashing lifeboats. Ice forms faster than men can clear it, weighing down masts and superstructures until the ships roll sluggishly, dangerously. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins grips the rail as a wave crashes over the bridge, water instantly freezing on contact. The ship shudders but holds. Below, the reinforced hull plates creak and groan, but they do not crack. Then the weather breaks. As suddenly as it came, the storm eases, leaving behind a bruised convoy spread thin across miles of ocean. The escorts scramble to reform the screen, radios crackling with position reports. This is the moment the Germans have been waiting for. U-boat commanders track the convoy's disrupted formation with cold patience. In the gray light of an Arctic afternoon, torpedoes fan out beneath the surface, silver shapes racing toward their prey. The first explosion rips into a freighter on the convoy's flank. The blast lifts her stern clear of the water before she settles back, fatally wounded. Flames lick at her decks, smoke trailing low across the sea. On Empire Starling, the alarm sounds again. Submarine contact! Depth charge crews move with grim efficiency. Escorts turn toward the threat, screws churning water into white foam. Explosions blossom behind them, thunder rolling through the hulls of nearby ships. This is not the scattered slaughter of PQ-17. This is a fight. Merchant ships maneuver as best they can, altering course together, presenting fewer easy angles. Gunners remain at their stations, eyes scanning not just the sky but the water, alert for periscopes or torpedo wakes. A torpedo streaks toward Empire Starling's bow. A lookout spots it at the last possible second. The helm is thrown hard over. The ship heels sharply, plates screaming in protest as the torpedo passes so close its wake slaps against the hull. Cheers erupt, then stop as another explosion rocks the convoy. The battle rages for hours. Escorts chase contacts, lose them, regain them. Aircraft from land bases arrive intermittently, forcing U-boats deeper. Several ships are damaged. One is lost, but most survive. When the convoy finally reaches Soviet waters, battered but intact, the numbers tell the story. Losses are heavy, but not catastrophic. Supplies reach Murmansk again. German commanders are furious. In post-action reports, U-boat captains complain of convoys that fight back, of merchant ships that refuse to behave like victims, of anti-aircraft fire that disrupts air coordination and forces submarines to attack under worse conditions. The Arctic lanes, once a shooting gallery, have become contested ground. Back in Britain, McIntyre reads the reports late into the night. He notes where ice damage exceeded expectations, where gun mounts jammed, where insulation proved insufficient. Each flaw is circled in pencil, each success underlined. The work is not finished, but something fundamental has shifted. The balance between hunter and hunted is no longer absolute, and the Germans know it. They begin to reconsider surface sorties. The Scharnhorst remains bottled up by threat of interception. Tirpitz lurks, powerful but constrained, her mere presence still shaping Allied decisions, but no longer decisive. The Arctic convoys sail on. Each voyage is still a gamble. Each ship still risks destruction. But the sea no longer guarantees German victory. For the men in the shipyards, for the crews at sea, that difference is everything. Section 6. Engineering Under Fire. April 1943 brings a pale, reluctant sun to the Clyde. Daylight lingers longer now, revealing yards choked with half-finished hulls and stacks of steel plate crusted with rust and frost. The war has ground on long enough that nothing here feels temporary anymore. The changes made in desperation after PQ-17 are no longer experiments. They are doctrine. Thomas McIntyre walks the length of a newly modified freighter, clipboard tucked under his arm, breath fogging the air. He stops frequently, kneeling to inspect welds, tapping plates with a small hammer to listen for flaws. Each sound carries meaning. A dull thud, a ringing note. He knows which is dangerous. Around him, men work with the practiced efficiency of exhaustion. Riveters hammer in tight rhythms. Fitters adjust gun mounts to new tolerances. Electricians thread cables through insulated conduits that did not exist a year earlier. These ships are no longer being built merely to float. They're being built to endure. Reports from the Arctic now arrive regularly. They're studied line by line. When a gun freezes, the heater design is altered. When ice accumulation threatens stability, drainage is widened again. When crews complain that ammunition handling is too slow in heavy gloves, feed systems are adjusted. The shipyard becomes a living laboratory, one informed by combat. McIntyre is summoned once more to London. This time, the atmosphere is different. The same room, the same table, but fewer photographs of wreckage. More charts showing tonnage delivered, ships returned. Admiral Horton does not smile, but his tone is steadier. We're still losing ships, he says, but we're not losing the war in the Arctic. A younger officer speaks up. Soviet reports indicate improved morale at the ports. They're planning operations based on reliable supply schedules again. That, McIntyre knows, is the true measure of success. Outside the Admiralty, London bears its own scars. Bomb damage still pockmarked streets. Sandbags line public buildings. The war is everywhere. Yet for the first time in months, McIntyre allows himself a cautious optimism. At sea, the convoys continue to evolve. Escorts coordinate more tightly with merchant gunners. Signals are standardized. Drills are refined. Ships practice maintaining station under fire until it becomes instinctive. The Germans respond in kind, shifting tactics again. They concentrate air attacks, probing for weak points. They deploy more experienced U-boat commanders, hoping skill will compensate for changing odds. The result is a grim equilibrium. In May, a convoy is mauled by heavy weather and air attack, losing several ships. In June, another sails through with minimal losses. There are no easy months, only survivable ones. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins prepares for yet another run north. His ship bears scars now, dents and patches that tell a story only those who have been there can read. His crew is largely the same men who survived the first voyage, though a few have rotated out, nerves or health broken by the strain. Collins addresses them briefly before departure. He does not give a speech. He simply says, "We know what waits for us, and we know we can get through." As the convoy clears the coast and turns north once more, Collins watches the escorts take position. He thinks of the men in the yards who altered his ship, who fought their own battle against time and steel. He thinks of the men in Murmansk waiting for what he carries. The Arctic still kills without mercy, but it no longer kills blindly. Every ship that returns brings new knowledge. Every convoy that arrives proves that engineering, applied under fire, can change the course of a campaign. And that realization spreads, quietly but decisively, through the Allied war effort. Section 7. The Convoys That Refuse to Die. July 1943 dawns over the Norwegian Sea with a low, sullen light. Summer in the Arctic does not bring warmth so much as exposure. The ice retreats just enough to open wider lanes of water, and with them, wider hunting grounds for the enemy. The sun never fully sets now, robbing convoys of the darkness that once offered brief concealment. Convoy WWII pushes north under constant observation. German reconnaissance aircraft shadow the formation from a distance, their presence announced by the distant glint of wings against cloud. Every man aboard knows what that means. Somewhere beyond the horizon, decisions are being made. Somewhere in a fjord, engines may already be warming. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins watches the sky through binoculars, jaw clenched. The gun crews remain at their stations, even when no attack comes. Fatigue has become a permanent companion. There are no true off-hours in the Arctic. The Germans strike in waves. First come the aircraft. High-altitude bombers drop sticks of explosives meant to scatter the convoy. The bombs fall wide, splashing harmlessly but forcing evasive maneuvers. As ships turn together, maintaining station despite the chaos, the second wave dives in low. This time, the defensive fire is immediate and ferocious. The merchant ships have learned to anticipate the attack profile. Guns open up before the bombers reach release distance, filling the air with tracer and shrapnel. A Heinkel He-111 presses its run too long. Flak bursts bloom around it. One shell detonates just off the port wing. The aircraft shudders, then spirals downward, vanishing into the sea. The escorts add their fire, radar-directed guns tracking targets with increasing accuracy. The attack breaks apart. Surviving aircraft withdraw, leaving only smoke and wreckage behind. That night, U-boats try again. Hydrophone operators strain to pick out contacts amid the noise of engines and shifting ice. A destroyer breaks formation to investigate a suspected contact. Depth charges roll. Explosions ripple through the dark water. A torpedo finds a ship near the rear of the convoy. The explosion is brutal, splitting the hull and extinguishing all lights in an instant. The ship lists sharply, men scrambling to abandon her as flames climb the superstructure. Empire's Starling passes close enough for Collins to see figures on the deck, silhouettes against the fire. Lifeboats hit the water amid ice floes. Escorts race to pick up survivors even as the threat remains. The convoy does not stop. That decision weighs heavily on every captain present. But experience has taught them the cost of hesitation. They press on, tighten formation, reducing the angles of attack. By dawn, the convoy still moves north. Losses are counted, painfully, but the majority of ships remain. The supplies remain. The line is unbroken. When WWII reaches Murmansk, Soviet officials greet the convoy with a mixture of relief and grim respect. Cargo is unloaded immediately. Tanks roll onto frozen quays. Crates of ammunition are stacked under camouflage nets. Aircraft fuel is siphoned into waiting drums. One Soviet colonel gestures toward the ships. Last year, he says, this would not have arrived. Collins does not reply. He knows the truth of it. Back in Britain, the news filters through slowly, stripped of drama. Another convoy arrived. Losses acceptable. Tonnage delivered. But among the men who understand what that means, the impact is profound. The Arctic convoys have crossed a threshold. They are no longer desperate gestures. They are sustained operations. German planners see it too. Reports to Berlin speak of convoys that cannot be destroyed cheaply, of increasing Allied coordination, of diminishing returns. Resources that might have gone elsewhere are tied down in the north, chasing convoys that refuse to disappear. The shipyard on the Clyde continues its work, quieter now, more routine. The frantic improvisation of late 1942 has given way to a grim competence. What was once impossible has become expected. And still, the convoys sail. Not because the Arctic has grown kinder, but because men on both sides of the ocean learned how to survive it. Section 8. The balance tips north. August 1943 brings a strange contradiction to the Arctic War. The sea remains brutal, the enemy relentless. Yet something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface of the campaign. The convoys now sail on schedules that planners dare to commit to paper. Not confidently, not comfortably, but deliberately. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins receives new sailing orders with a sense of grim familiarity. Another northbound run. Another cargo stacked deep in the holds. Another test of steel, nerves, and weather. Yet as he studies the convoy list, he notices something different. There are more ships than before, more escorts, more redundancy. The line is thickening. German pressure, though still dangerous, begins to feel reactive rather than dominant. Aircraft shadow the convoy, but hesitate longer before committing. U-boat contacts are frequent, but attacks are less coordinated. The hunters are no longer certain of the kill. In Naval, Kapitän José Müller sits through increasingly strained briefings. Resources are finite. The Eastern Front demands men and fuel. The Mediterranean bleeds aircraft. Every bomber diverted north is one less elsewhere. Every U-boat lost to Arctic escorts is one that will never patrol the Atlantic lanes. He reads the latest reports in silence. Convoy losses remain steady, but sinkings no longer justify the effort expended. Worse, Soviet forces are receiving supplies in quantities that were unthinkable months earlier. The Arctic, once a lever of German strategic pressure, is slipping from his grasp. At sea, the convoys press on. In mid-August, a heavy surface threat finally materializes. Intelligence reports suggest German capital ships are preparing to sortie. The tension aboard the convoy is palpable. Men glance nervously at the horizon, half expecting the gray silhouettes of battleships to rise from the mist. They never do. Allied naval pressure, air reconnaissance, and the ever-present threat of interception keep the German ships in port. Their power remains theoretical, shaping decisions but never delivered. For the merchant crews, that restraint is victory enough. On one clear Arctic morning, Empire Starling sails through calm water, the surface broken only by ice fragments drifting lazily past. For a brief moment, the sea is almost beautiful. Collins stands on the bridge wing, breathing air so cold it burns his lungs, and allows himself a rare thought. They might make it home again. When the convoy reaches Murmansk, unloading proceeds faster than ever. Soviet port crews are better organized now, practiced by repetition. Supplies flow inland along rail lines that no longer sit idle for lack of cargo. Red Army officers speak openly of upcoming operations, their confidence rooted not in optimism, but logistics. They know what is coming because the convoys keep coming. Back in Britain, McIntyre walks through the yard as another ship slides into the water. He pauses, watching her settle, feeling a quiet satisfaction he never voices. This is not triumph. It is endurance made tangible. The impossible thing they were asked to do after PQ-17 was never to eliminate losses. It was to restore movement where paralysis had set in, to prove that the Arctic could be crossed again and again, even under fire. By late summer 1943, that proof is undeniable. The convoys have tipped the balance, not with a single dramatic victory, but with persistence engineered into steel and habit. And as the nights begin to lengthen once more, the Arctic waits. But now, it waits for ships that know how to survive it. Section 9. When Survival Became Strategy. September 1943 returns darkness to the Arctic in slow increments. Each day loses a few more minutes of light, and with it, the fragile advantage summer had offered. The sea grows rougher again. Winds sharpen. Snow replaces rain. The environment resumes its role as a combatant rather than a backdrop. But the convoys no longer enter this darkness blindly. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins receives updated tactical instructions before departure. They are no longer framed as emergency measures. They are standardized doctrine. Formation spécifique. Evasive patterns under air attack. Coordinated gunnery zones between merchant ships and escorts. What once had to be learned in blood is now written, rehearsed, and expected. The ship sails north with a confidence that would have seemed reckless a year earlier. This time, the enemy does not strike immediately. Days pass under constant tension, aircraft sightings logged, but no attacks launched. U-boat contacts appear intermittently, then fade. The Germans are still present, still dangerous, but no longer omnipresent. In Berlin, strategic priorities have shifted. The Eastern Front consumes resources at a terrifying rate. Kursk has failed. The Red Army presses westward. Every ton of fuel, every aircraft squadron, every train crew is contested between fronts. The Arctic convoys, once viewed as ripe targets, now represent diminishing returns. German commanders argue over allocations. Some insist pressure must be maintained, that allowing supplies through is strategically unacceptable. Others point to losses, to the increasing difficulty of achieving decisive results against convoys that fight back, maneuver cohesively, and absorb damage without collapsing. No consensus is reached. At sea, that indecision saves lives. In early October, a Luftwaffe group attempts a coordinated strike under heavy cloud cover. Bombers descend through gaps in the overcast, hoping surprise will compensate for reduced numbers. The convoy responds instantly. Radar picks up contacts. Guns track shadows in the cloud base. The attack is violent but brief. 2 ships are damaged. 1 aircraft is shot down. The bombers withdraw, their mission incomplete. No follow-on attack comes. On the bridge, Collins exhales slowly, aware of how unusual that feels. The convoy reaches Murmansk again. By now, Soviet port operations are streamlined to a degree that astonishes Allied observers. Supplies are offloaded, cataloged, and dispatched inland with minimal delay. Rail yards hum day and night. Trucks roll east and south toward the front. A Soviet logistics officer tells Collins, "Last winter, we waited and hoped. Now we plan." Those words echo far beyond the port. Back on the Clyde, McIntyre receives notice that some emergency measures are being revised not for speed, but longevity. Materials once chosen for immediate availability are replaced with better alloys as supply improves. Designs are refined for repeated Arctic service rather than single voyages. The impossible improvisation of 1942 has matured into a system. McIntyre pauses one evening beside the river, watching lights shimmer on the dark water. He thinks of the first night he stood here, convinced the ships he was altering might never return. Now, ships come back battered but serviceable, crews rotated but alive. The cost remains high. No one pretends otherwise. But survival has become predictable enough to build strategy around it. That is the true victory. The Arctic convoys are no longer acts of desperation. They are instruments of sustained pressure, feeding an Allied war machine that now moves with momentum the Axis cannot match. As winter closes in again, the sea prepares its next test. This time, the convoys are ready. Section 10. The Winter That Did Not Break Them. November 1943 returns the Arctic to its most unforgiving state. Darkness becomes permanent. The sun disappears entirely, leaving only a dim blue twilight at midday before night reclaims the sky. Temperatures plunge far below zero. Steel contracts. Lubricants thicken. Breath crystallizes in the air. This is the season that destroyed PQ-17. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins knows it. Every man aboard knows it. The memory hangs unspoken as the convoy forms up and turns north once again. The sea is already rimmed with ice, pressure ridges grinding against the hull as the ship pushes through broken floes. This time, the preparations are deliberate. Before sailing, every gun mount is tested in cold chambers. Every steam line inspected. Crews drill endlessly in blackout conditions, memorizing positions by feel rather than sight. The ships carry extra winter gear, extra rations, extra redundancy in systems that once failed without warning. The convoy advances slowly, methodically. German activity increases as winter deepens. Aircraft attacks are fewer, hampered by weather and limited daylight, but U-boats grow bolder, operating closer to the ice edge where detection is harder and escorts maneuver with difficulty. One night, just after midnight, the convoy is hit hard. A torpedo slams into a freighter near the center of the formation. The explosion flashes briefly, lighting the sea in ghostly white before darkness returns. The ship lists sharply, cargo shifting violently inside her holds. On Empire Starling, alarms sound instantly. The convoy alters course together, escorts racing to the contact. Depth charges roll, detonations echoing through the frozen water. Another torpedo misses its target by meters, passing beneath a ship's keel. A third explodes harmlessly against ice, its shockwave rippling outward. For hours, the convoy fights blind, guided by sound, radar echoes, and instinct. Ice crunches against hulls. Guns fire at shadows. Men work until exhaustion threatens collapse. Then gradually the contact fades. The U-boats withdraw. When dawn fails to arrive, the convoy counts its losses. One ship sunk, 2 damaged, the rest still moving. In the context of the Arctic, it is a success. As the convoy nears Soviet waters, ice thickens again, threatening to trap slower vessels. Escorts break ice paths where they can. Merchant ships follow carefully, engines straining. At Murmansk, dock lights burn through the darkness like beacons. The harbor is crowded now, not with wrecks, but with ships unloading. Soviet crews work in brutal conditions without pause, their urgency driven by knowledge hard-earned over the past year. Supplies flow inland once more. Back in Britain, news of the convoy's arrival is received with muted relief. There are no headlines, no celebrations, just another entry in a ledger that shows continuity where once there was collapse. Thomas McIntyre reads the winter reports with a mixture of pride and weariness. The ships performed as intended. Failures were contained. Crews survived conditions that would have been fatal a year earlier. The impossible task he was given after PQ-17 was never to defeat the Arctic. It was to endure it. As 1943 draws to a close, that endurance has become institutional. The convoys sail because they can. The Germans contest them because they must. The Soviets receive supplies because the line holds. The Arctic remains merciless, but it no longer decides the outcome alone. Section 11. The quiet victory no one celebrated. January 1944 arrives without ceremony. The calendar turns, but the Arctic does not notice. Darkness still rules the sea. Wind scours exposed decks. Ice creeps relentlessly along hulls and superstructures. Yet beneath the brutality of winter, a profound transformation has taken hold. The convoys now sail as a matter of routine. On Empire Starling, Captain Collins marks the new year not with a toast, but with a course correction. The ship settles into the familiar rhythm of convoy life. Engines steady, lookouts vigilant, gunners alert even when their fingers ache too badly to feel the triggers. There's no talk of heroism, only procedure. That, Collins knows, is the difference. In January 1943, every Arctic voyage felt like a last stand. Now, a year later, survival has been reduced to process. Drill, discipline, engineering solutions tested and retested under fire. German attacks continue, but they lack the urgency they once carried. U-boats still probe the convoy edges, but wolfpacks are thinner now, their numbers reduced by losses elsewhere. Luftwaffe sorties are sporadic, constrained by fuel shortages, weather, and competing priorities on other fronts. The Arctic has become a sideshow in a war that has grown too large for Germany to dominate everywhere at once. In Murmansk, Soviet officers receive convoy manifests weeks in advance. They plan rail movements before ships arrive. Frontline commanders schedule offensives knowing trucks, fuel, and ammunition will reach them on time. Logistics, once a gamble, becomes a foundation. A Red Army general remarks to an Allied liaison officer, "You no longer send us hope. You send us certainty." That certainty ripples outward. On the Eastern Front, Soviet formations maneuver with confidence born of supply. Armored units push farther, faster. Airfields remain operational through winter. Artillery does not ration shells as desperately as before. None of this traces back to a single battle or dramatic moment. It traces back to shipyards, to weld seams, to gun tubs added under floodlights in the rain. Back on the Clyde, Thomas McIntyre walks the yard with younger engineers now. They listen as he explains why a plate is reinforced here, why a heater runs there, why drainage must never be compromised. These lessons are no longer emergency measures. They are institutional knowledge. A junior engineer asks him one evening, "Did you know it would work?" McIntyre pauses before answering. "I knew it had to." That is as close as he comes to reflection. As winter loosens its grip and daylight begins its slow return, the convoys continue. Ships damaged in one run are repaired and sent north again. Crews rotate, but experience accumulates. The Arctic, once a graveyard, becomes a corridor. Losses still occur. Men still die. Ships still sink. But the line does not break. In Berlin, the Arctic convoys barely register anymore. They're no longer decisive targets, no longer symbols of Allied vulnerability. German planners focus elsewhere, where they can still influence outcomes. That neglect is itself a verdict. By early 1944, the impossible thing Britain was asked to do after PQ-17 has been accomplished. Not with a miracle, not with a single invention, but with relentless, adaptive engineering applied under the harshest conditions imaginable. The Arctic convoys were doomed once. Now, they're simply there, and that, in war, is victory,